Hello. Am I muted?
No, I was muted. Am I
Oh,
still muted?
I'm supposed to be muted.
Oh, you're supposed to be muted.
Yeah,
Are we actually on? My bad.
I think so.
Oh, I'm so sorry, everyone. I this is what happens when I didn't hear the sounds. I didn't hear any of the music. I thought we were gonna play the opening sequence. Okay. I'm assuming that we are good to go. So welcome everyone. We are here today. We're going to talk about a paper that Cardano put out a little while ago. I guess I'm jumping right into it. Why don't I actually hand it to Aaron and let him introduce ourselves and before I just go right into the top subject matter.
Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm Director of Research with Doppel. Today we're going to be talking about chimeric ledgers, which is a paper that came out about in 2018. And it's kind of a classic paper at this point. And we wanted to review it because it has a really good exposition of UTXO systems and account-based transaction systems for ledgers. And then it specifies a way of translating between those two ledger functionalities. And it's a really kind of solid treatment of both topics, and it unifies both into one framework. So yeah, I'll go ahead and dive right into it. So here's the paper. And so yeah, this first section is the let me scroll up so I can see it. So these cryptocurrency systems have been historically divided in a kind of two styles of tracking transactions. One's account-based and one is UTXO-based. UTXO stands for unspent transaction output. And in this paper, they kind of cover, or it's a single author. So, and in fact, I think this I read somewhere that
I think it's a pseudonym.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually. Yeah.
So
this is a heck of a last name, though, for a pseudonym, especially.
Yeah. It's German for tooth puller.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's so cool. I love that.
So this framework for kind of understanding both transaction models in the same footing, I think, is really valuable. And the notation that's kind of presented in this paper is helping me understand the UTXO system from the get-go. It was kind of a good refresher for me. The chimeric ledger aspect of this is that translation between the UTXO system of account balance and the account balances. So that's kind of the primary contribution of this paper. So they introduce kind of abstractions of these ledgers as a list of transactions. And recall that the job of a distributed consensus is to select the transaction ledger which is correct at any given time. And typically in blockchain systems, we're considering the longest chain as the correct ledger state. The longest chain rule helps all the participants come to consensus on what state the ledger's in. And no matter what the transaction model you're using, you can still interpret that sequence of transitions as either like state transitions or just a sequence of transactions that plays out. And on page 2, the definition 1, we have a ledger is just a list of valid transactions. So all the kind of predicates of making a transaction, creating it, and the signatures and the cryptographic constraints and primitives that go into defining how you construct a transaction are abstracted away a little bit in this. So we're assuming that we have sequences of valid transactions and there's no malicious party trying to forge or create forgeries. And these...
Sorry, I'm just give me 1 second, please.
Sure.
So I'm sorry, folks. I'm as Aaron is kind of going through. I'm going to try to keep my note, or I'm the one doing the iPad and letting Aaron kind of talk about it, and then I'll, if you're okay with it, I'll just interrupt and we talk a bit. But I also want to keep notation, so I'm just going to make a page so we can have all of our notation in one place, i.e. the grammar.
Yes.
right? Like, what is our language? Okay, so can you tell me what was the definition of the ledger?
A ledger is a list of transactions.
Just list of any transaction, either account or UTXO. Yeah.
So, and then they use lambda to represent the ledger. So lambda is used throughout this paper to represent the abstract list of transactions in both models.
Do they say how they define that part?
I think
Or just
lambda
like- is like equal or
well,
or what is their notation for calling this lambda? That's my question.
a list lambda of type list T. Yeah. So under their notations, they have a list lambda of type list T is either the empty list or list E : lambda prime with a head. So it allows them to reason about the list by like the head and tail, and you can recursively define operations on the ledger in the same way you would define recursive operations on a list. So you can pop off the head and keep the tail and do operations on the tail.
Sorry.
And there's a couple of notational conventions that they introduce.
Like these?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, so yeah, so maybe just to like the grammar, like I'm shown here. So we have a record. So records have these fields phi1 to phi n, and of types t1 tn, and so a record would be denoted as not gamma. Phi, I think that is phi, right? Am I? Like, what is there? I always forget like phi versus psi. Psi is the pitchforky thing.
Psi is a pitchfork.
In they use little lowercase n. So lowercase n of type t to the n. Okay. So if t is a value of a record type t and phi is a name of a field t, then t phi denotes, or t dot phi denotes the value of phi for t. So t dot phi. I don't know how to say denotes. This is the value. Because they use this, like later on, they just use this abstract term called value, right?
Right.
And I think that's what this would be what they're referring to. At least, I don't know, maybe. A list of type lambda, that was this. Oh, I'm sorry. So they're saying this. Oh, yeah. Come on. Let's see. So we're going to call any generic list is lambda, right?
That's correct.
But
in this notation, but they're using lambda as a placeholder for,
let's say list
ledger.
Right. Well, I would say list transaction is a ledger. So like but a generic list they assign to lambda. But maybe we can think of this as like in the Scala notation as like lambda type parameter.
Okay.
And then a lambda, like when I say lambda type parameter, when I say like a ledger would be equal to a lambda of transaction, where we assign t equals tx.
Yeah, I'd say that.
Right. Yeah. So lambda is just like any list. It's just like literally a relabeling of list. And then a ledger would just be a list of transactions. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, I like that. So we have lambda can be the empty list or a singly linked list, as you said.
And then some conventions that are used in a lot of other papers in this research space, like using colons for concatenation, and then abbreviations with respect to the concatenations of lists with these brackets. And all of these details kind of come together in the exposition of the translations between the UTXO system and the account-based system. So they use all this notation, but it's kind of, some of it's standard, some of it's specific to this, like values being preceded, monetary values being preceded by dollar signs, and addresses being preceded by the at symbol. But the anonymous function notation is important because they use that in a couple of instances where it's mapping from one type to another data type. And like, for instance, this case projection of the tuple is denoted as the elements of the tuple with a fat arrow to a sub k in the notations. So, yeah. Oh, and then finally, they're using the cryptographic hash. They're denoting the cryptographic hash of C raised to the power of the hash symbol.
And then assignment is just V to C or C to V or V assigned to C. I never understand how to do these left arrows. Like, how do you what do you read when you see the left arrow?
V gets C.
V gets C. Oh, I like C. I like that gets. It's a good idea. Okay, at some point I'm gonna my whole point in this was actually there's so much in this paragraph, man.
Yeah.
There's like a record types. Yeah, there's the definition of list. There's the definition of a singly linked list. There's how you index the list. There's the arithmetic.
But it's nice that it's so compact
It is.
and like at the forefront of the paper, and it really helps.
Agreed.
To just have that dense section to like refer to as you're going through the paper.
Yeah, literally like
it makes the paper so much more understandable.
Yeah.
To be able to reference this. So I really have appreciated that section.
There is also a we should have maybe shouted this out at the very beginning. This is not the first video on YouTube actually for this paper in particular. There's another one from a couple years ago that goes over in a very similar fashion, kind of like the primary ideas of chimeric ledgers. So, this is a good paper overall. And if you want to see more resources or alternative explanations, just letting you know that those are out there. Okay, back to.
So let's go to the UTXO based section.
The page 3.
Yeah, section 3. And what's really nice is they give the definition of the UTXO transaction format, and with regards to all of its fields and specific values.
Cool.
And then they give specific examples on the next page of UTXO transactions. So example 1 gives examples of a series of transactions, and even goes so far as to list the ledger as a series of the abstract, not the abstract, but the specific transactions that they construct here. And the inputs and outputs all logically make sense according to the value constraints that they put in. So in definition 2, we see that the UTXO transaction format has a set of inputs and outputs and a list of outputs. So James, so what is the difference between the set of inputs and outputs? What that makes it such that the inputs has to be a set and the outputs has to be a list?
Because the inputs, or at least, okay, I had a very similar question, and the way I reasoned it to myself is that the input here is going to be, I'm going to do it in R notation for a second. So it might not be, R notation might not be compatible with theirs. So let's just think about it for ours. So for ours, it's going to be a box ID, a prop, a proof, and a value. Well, I know for one thing, I should only ever spend a box ID once.
Right.
So then I should definitely be able to say this is set, because at least this part of the tuple should be different for every single member. And if this part's not different, then it's syntactically invalid. Like this whole transaction should be syntactically invalid, right? So that's at least for the input side. For the output side, I would say it's a list, or you can get away with a list, because an output is, sorry, I do specifically mean an output is just, evident, or in his in address. and a value v, right? And so because I can have multiple, like there's nothing saying that this has to be unique. Like nothing in this says it has to be unique.
Okay.
In the outputs, right? So I can send multiple, like in a single transaction, I could send multiple tokens to the same address.
Right.
Like I could reproduce this tuple, is what I mean.
Right.
I could have this tuple again, but they would just result in multiple UTXOs in the output state.
So to correctly resolve a specific output, you have to reference the transaction and then an index with respect to which output you're actually referring to. Right.
Right. So that's a perfect point. And so that we I kind of brushed that under the rug here, where I said that, a box ID, and what is a box ID, but a box ID is a tuple itself of a like transaction ID and an index and an output index. And indeed, it is the index that kind of corresponds to the position in this list. I'm sorry, I know that was like a terrible little thing for people, but hopefully that's what it. So that's why you don't have to just the construction of the output. One way, I guess maybe one way I think about, maybe we should start talking about the difference between Web 3 and Web 2, is that Web 2, we just got to specify inputs, and then we had to give them to Google or Facebook or whatever, and they got to tell us what the outputs were. But in Web 3, we get to say we get to say, here are the inputs I want to consume, and here are the outputs I want, Google. Dang it. Right? So we not only get to say the inputs and the output, we get to also say the outputs, which is the power of Web 3, or
and then
one of the things.
Let distributed consensus sort out what the correct outputs are, or what order.
Right. Or how to order, how to order my transaction in relation to everyone else. But I had self-sovereignty, or I had complete control over my ability to dictate where my state evolved to. This is the idea. Or really you give agency to the users.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Now, is that something that would be true in the account-based model as well?
It could be. Is it? I don't think so.
I see.
Right. But I actually think this paper, if you were to do, I would argue Ethereum is actually a centralized computer on top of decentralized consensus.
Yeah.
Right. That is what MEV is you are literally, all you did was give your inputs. It is no different than Facebook. Ethereum's compute model is no different than Facebook.
Except everybody's taking turns being a centralized authority on what.
Exactly. You assume that it's still fair if everyone actually randomly takes turns ordering the transactions, but we already know that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
That we can look at the MEV and say that it's super concentrated, and only a few people get advantage of all that, get to dictate the outputs for us, because they get to dictate MEV in an Ethereum system or that type of system. But I believe because an account model could be a UTXO model where you force, what if this was not the easiest account model would be one where you say there's a single input and a single output.
Yeah.
It's literally the exact same thing, except that I say there's a single input and a single output. And in his version, he doesn't do that because he adds the nonce here. He says that the account level itself is where you put the replay attack. But why? Why can't I put the replay attack into the input? Into the output? And then my account thing is, I just, instead of being able to handle lists here, I force you to do a single one. Right? And then, I think you're right. You could, in an account model, still allow this, or this, allow you to do this inputs and outputs. But the whole the problem that my understanding of why they wouldn't do that, or why you wouldn't want to do that, is because to do that, restricting to one, is actually kind of getting the worst of both worlds. You're getting the concurrency problems that you get with UTXO, and you're getting the sharded state problem. You're getting the sharded state problem. You have the concurrency problem, which is really just another way of saying the sharded state problem. And then you have the MEV. They get to not MEV. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say is you don't get to because you're dictating the output. The Ethereum virtual machine doesn't get to order how it wants to, or decide how it wants to run the transactions, or they don't get to decide it. Mm-hmm. So you kind of get the worst of both worlds. So it's this idea of like shared state and like how do we enable high throughput as a virtual machine that I think push them to an account model, like a shared state account.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, I digress. We can get back to this. Interesting question though. I will say for everyone, our internally to Topple, our account model is a little different. That's what I'm showing. Our UTXO model is slightly different. That's what I'm showing here on the bottom. But it's close enough for the sake here that we can maybe ignore it. But yeah, you want to go to the next section here?
Yeah, and then they further they define the outputs and inputs where the ID is the ID of the previous transaction to which an input refers. An index indicates which of the referred transactions outputs would be spent. So an input consists of an ID and an index that basically denotes the unspent output that is provably spendable. And it's assumed that are there any additional pieces of information that go into an input in Topple system or UTXO system? Oh, and keep in mind we're in the extended UTXO system, so we do have some modifications other than just, I think, notational.
So yeah, this sorry, I'm trying to like make the transitions and zooming not too terrible for everyone. But so yeah, this is kind of more like what the Topple system is. We have this like, this thing we just saw, the transaction ID and the index as like this part. But then we also have this like, we call them like it's like a logical Boolean function it's a Boolean based logical proposition or like spending predicate. And there's basically the proof, like your proof that you're allowed, that you can satisfy this proposition and therefore can consume the inputs. And then this value part that just hangs around. So what we're abstracting away, and what he talks about in this paper is saying, normally this part hangs around, or we got this part is important, but we're going to discount it for that. We can ignore it for this paper. We only need to think about the in terms of mapping. We don't need to think about this code part. We only need to think about the mapping of the value and how to label things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like the value is the part that pretty much this whole paper is saying, like, if I have value spread across many states, how can I reflect that value when I accumulate into one state, and then I can go from one state into like mapping into many states again?
Now, so do you mean a ledger state in this context?
Yeah, I mean like a UTXO, like an encapsulation of some quantity. That's what I mean by state. So yeah, last part. We do in general have to deal with this. Every system in general has to deal with like something like this: the code part, the authorization part, the consumption part. But it is neglected for the part of this paper, or for the remainder of the paper.
So in definition 3, we have a function that takes the, let's see, function input ledger option. So it's a function that returns a transaction from the ledger. And I think they use that in one of their procedures for calculating the balance of a given UTXO address, or an address in the UTXO system. So I wanted to cover, so in the account-based system, it's pretty straightforward to calculate a balance, but in the UTXO system, it's a little more subtle. So definition 4 gets the unspent outputs of a transaction, of a single transaction, and it's using a functional mapping for with respect to the inputs and outputs, and then the spent outputs are given in the next function that they define here. So spent outputs are a lot more straightforward. It's just getting a set of the inputs for a transaction. So definition 5 gets you the set of unspent outputs of a ledger that can be computed by applying, so it gets you all the unspent outputs of an entire ledger. And this is the key kind of recursive definition that gets you all of the outputs, and then to get a balance with respect to the address of interest, you go to definition 7. So UTXO balance of an address A and a valid transaction T with respect to the ledger is given with respect to an individual transaction. So you can't really know your balance without the entire ledger state and all previous transactions that correspond to that address. So what they do is they define a function that gets you the balance on a per transaction basis. And then in definition 8, they have a recursive definition that gets you the balance of an entire ledger. So as you can see, it map in definition 8, you start on the balance, you start with an address, you go map to the ledger, then you map to a value. And the initial balance of an empty list is 0. And then the balance of a ledger that starts with transaction T is the balance of that transaction plus the balance of the entire ledger. And you recursively go back and calculate the balance of each individual transaction all the way back to the Genesis state. And that's it. That's how you calculate a balance in a UTXO system. So this is a little bit notationally heavy to digest, but once you understand the notation that they're using, it's fairly straightforward to understand the operations that are occurring here. So,
dude, this works so well with my model, the model that I'm making of the different ledgers and VMs and things.
Yeah.
Because literally, this is just a curried function, right?
Yeah.
Takes an address, you pick your ledger that you want to go to, and you look up the values associated with it.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't mention
That's
this.
So.
But there is a Scala implementation that they.
Oh, really? What?
Yeah. So a reference implementation in Scala of all concepts defined here is available. Yada yada yada.
Dang, they were doing another.
It is recommended to read the implementation together with the paper, but the link is dead.
Dang it!
No file.
How could you do this? Toe puller? Toenail? What did you say it was? Not toe puller.
I'm sorry. What?
What is the last name in German?
Tooth puller.
Tooth puller. I heard toe puller. I was just like, come on, toe puller. Okay, well, maybe we'll have to make our own implementation in Scala again.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's GitHub.
I could give it a shot.
Yeah, things.
It must be on GitHub somewhere.
Yeah. One big thing I'm going to point out, or is there anything else you want to, or you're ready to move on to account?
Yeah, I think so. I just wanted to point out how the notation actually works out in definition 8, and then you can start with definition 8 to understand UTXO balances, and then work your way back to kind of digest 7 feeds into 8, and then
that into that, and that into that, and then that to that. Okay, so but one maybe important thing that I want to point out in this to folks is that this definition 6 is pretty crucial, right? Because here they say that all inputs refer to all inputs refer to unspent outputs. So they're saying that you never just terminate a branch. You always fully account for them, right? For all T in inputs and I in unspent outputs. Yeah, that's the way and then the value has to be preserved. So it's not the only possible constraint in general. I could find a different arithmetic if I wanted to. But here we are specifically enforcing that the sum of inputs equals, or we only have a single token system, right? So the sum of the inputs has to equal the sum of the outputs. That's what this I say last, but that's what this part is saying. Okay. Next page.
All right. So in the account-based transactions, we have kind of a simpler format, but it has different fields, but we're kind of replacing inputs and outputs with sender and receiver, which are single addresses. So in definition 9, we have the transaction format for accounts, and the difference a new field has been added, a nonce, and specifically, also, the value fields are associated with not with the inputs or outputs, but just with the transactions itself. So the nonce is a special field that prevents replay attacks, and it's supposed to be a unique number that's associated with the sender address. And did I get that right? It's the sender address that has to have a new nonce every time.
Yeah, it's because you need to that's how you enforce the DAG.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in the case of Ethereum, it's a simple rule where the nonce has to increment by 1 each time a new transaction is sent from an address. And when I say sent from an address, I mean a transaction is minted that has a sender at a given address. The recipient would just receive funds and not have to increment their nonce. Is that true?
I'm sorry, say again. My bad.
If the receiver receives funds in a account, the nonce starts at 0 and only increments when a new transaction
Yes.
has that address as the sender field.
You only increment the nonce when you are sending from that account.
Sounds good.
Yes.
So that's a critical piece of machinery that's kind of incorporated into the account-based model to prevent these replay attacks, where people could just mint new blocks that send transactions from the same address twice, for instance, or however many times that they wanted, if there wasn't this constraint in place. So this is
alternatively, though, like what's really funny here is what if they had made this, or you can actually even kind of see it here. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Here, an alternative. Sorry.
Well, one detail in this is that they're only constraining the nonce to be unique and not necessarily increment. And
okay, interesting.
One note later on remarks about Ethereum on this next page. Note that Ethereum has a more strict condition for the transaction's nonce, whereas here, and this is just stating that the nonce is increment by 1, the most recent transaction increments the nonce and specifies the order in which the transactions can be played on the ledger. Ethereum's condition, on the other hand, gives users control over the order in which their transactions should be executed or expected to execute, and can be more efficiently checked, as it only requires a comparison with the most recent transaction from the same sender already in the ledger state. The weaker condition adopted here, that is, having just a random nonce and not necessarily incrementing it, because it's more general and hence encompasses also potential account-based cryptocurrencies that are less strict than Ethereum. In Ethereum, ethers can be transferred either directly through an externally created message or through a message created during the execution of a contract.
Oh, wow. That actually makes it... Oh, wow. I never thought about the combination of those two. Dang, that's a tough problem. Wow. I realize that's much... Because they let contracts write to contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that the nonce... Your contract could literally... I guess you could only break my contracts if you could... Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I never realized. I guess contracts can only spin from contracts, so you have different types of accounts in Ethereum. So yeah, never mind.
Right.
Okay.
So I think
that's why
I think they adopted the weaker condition to prevent the replays, but also it allows transactions to be processed in an arbitrary order. But that's not necessarily desirable, but it depends on the context and has implications for what minor extractable value for ordering transactions.
I don't know if it's minor extract, but I mean, yes, I'm sure it has implications there. I always thought it was more that say you, me, and Hans are all in a one of three multi-sig,
mm-hmm.
right? So we all have funds, like we're all in a shared company, and the three of us can pull from this pot, right?
Yeah.
So the thought is, what if we are forcing incrementing, then you and all three of us have to coordinate our numbers and increment, because Ethereum specifically says, I'm going to do 2, and then I'm going to look for 3, and then I'm going to look for 4. right? Whereas if we did, I think this idea, or at least in a DM, I think it's called conflict-free sequential numbers, because you do need them to be sequential, right? You need to force a direction to it, but I don't think you need to be. They can be hugely sequential, right? So if we pick a big enough space, right now the three of us need to coordinate. We don't need to coordinate because I just say, oh, I'm going to pick a number between 0 and 1,000, and you just say, I'm going to pick numbers between 1,001 and 2,000. Right. That way you can locally coordinate your. That's what they are like in this part. You said the weaker condition used here is sufficient to prevent replay attacks. Yeah, so it's still sufficient to prevent replay attacks as long as the number's increasing.
Right.
From like a previous thing of it. Maybe I can't. Okay. Maybe I realized as I said it. Maybe we can't be in 3 different spaces. So I'm not sure how these conflict-free serial numbers work. But that's what they want to do. They want to be able to say that, or I thought, was to say that users control over the order in which their transactions should be executed and can be more efficiently checked, as requires only comparison with the most recent transaction from the same sender. That was what I was looking for. This, like, it'd be that you can pick the numbers you want to use, but you wouldn't stop me. Like, you wouldn't have to communicate with me to spend from the same account. That's the point. I think. But we essentially don't have that because UTXOs take care of it for us. But I think the point is the same. They're trying to just say the same sender. Whereas this isn't really a problem if it's only one person. If one person's interacting with the contract, it's not really a problem. Okay. Let's see. I will one more point about this though. Maybe it's funny. This structure, this account thing is like completely different, right? Because an alternative way maybe to do what we were just talking about would be to have like, STXO, UTXO, and then say that the like instead of a list UTXO and a set STXO, right? Or set inputs. This is what I was talking about before. We just a single one.
Okay.
And then you can embed your nonce into here, and you embed your. You embed. I call it the nonce in the STXO. So your nonce is in here. Okay. They're implicitly. So here's how we could separate the code. You put the code in the contract in here, and then the this other part, the value and the fee. Like we've been ignoring the fee. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry. It's just really funny to me to see that this is kind of it's like they took all the pieces from the IO transaction or the UTXO transaction, and then just like took all those fields, and then it's like, okay, we're just going to drop all those fields instead of like putting them under STXOs and UTXOs. We're going to just put them all at the top level.
Yeah, I'd say that, and then just limiting the constraining what an individual can do in one transaction.
Right. Yeah. But what I realized when I said this part is they're kind of, to do that, I think you have to implicitly assume that there's code that resides at this address that will authorize this. I mean, I guess you could run it this way where your code is just identity, which would be the same thing that we're doing from like equation 1 or the UTXO transaction. Like your code is just identity. It's just existence.
I see.
But yeah, anyway, okay, I'm sorry. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but.
So in the further definitions here, they give balances for the account-based transactions. So in definition 10, we have a mapping from address to, I think that's supposed to be account-based transaction, and then value. And then the balance is simply the received minus the spent, which is as straightforward as can be with regards to keeping a track of a balance in a ledger book. The actual received value is just the sum of, let's see, this notation is kind of confusing.
So received, if A is in T receiver, so T is the transaction. So basically if if A is in this is this receiver address in the transaction,
Yeah.
then it's a value. Then you take the value, otherwise it's 0.
Oh, fair enough.
So yeah, and then sender is just your total inputs must be the value plus the fee minus the however many you're forging away. Oh yeah. The total amount you spent was the value you sent plus the fee you paid minus whatever you sent to yourself.
Right.
Right. Because it's like the spend, so you could probably put a negative on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because you lost the T dot value, you lost the T dot fee, but you gained the T dot forge.
Right.
If you sent to yourself. Okay.
All right. And then the account balance is the same kind of like recursive definition of with respect to a ledger. It takes an address, maps to a ledger, and maps to a value. But we start with the empty ledger having a balance of 0, and then the ledger balance having the individual balances of each transaction along with the ledger balance of the populated transaction of the tail of that ledger.
Hey, this looks really similar.
Yeah. And maybe that similarity indicates that there can be some way of translating between the two systems. What? Who would have thought? So that's what we're going to do in the next section, section 5. So finally, we're at the contribution of this paper, the formal translation between these two accounting systems. So there's a couple of kind of, the mapping from the account base to UTXO base is more straightforward. And then the translation between UTXO based to account based is more difficult to formalize. And I think the reasoning being that I think it's easier to kind of translate the individual or pull the reverse of the operation that you kind of just said, like take a transaction and then upgrade its sender and receiver to like inputs and outputs. And you can construct a subset of inputs that would be like spendable with respect to the next like set of transactions. They go one by one. This step for they come up with this translation from account to UTXO for an individual transaction and a ledger lambda prime. And lambda prime is the target ledger that you're translating to. So yeah, these steps are the kind of crux of how to translate one after the other.
Interesting.
So, and then their equivalence proposition is in proposition 1. So the translation of a transaction on ledger prime is equivalent to that transaction on ledger lambda, the original ledger, for any account-based transaction T and ledgers lambda and lambda prime, such that the balance is greater than or equal to the spent, and the balance in lambda prime is greater than or equal to the spent, where spent is the value plus the fee minus the forge, if T sender has some address S, I think. Is that right? S is supposed to be the address.
Well, no, it's saying because T dot in the account made model, sender is an option.
Yes.
So it's saying you can't have a none sender.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think I read that wrong.
I think the nuns. It's really interesting that he would allow for a none sender. I mean, does he allow for, maybe that's allowing for like inflation, like cosmic inflation, like it emanates from nothing, created from nothing. I think.
Oh,
so I mean, I mean that's the only reason.
You have to account for
like the
coin-based transactions and
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like you're within the protocol. It's like that's where the protocol could say, like it's the protocol is an address, so the sender is none,
Yeah.
but I can have a
see.
non-zero forge value. So maybe that would be why you're saying that it's not the protocol, like internally the protocol itself could create anything, but the protocol is defined for its ledger. Anyway.
And then the reciprocal operation of taking a UTXO base to an account base is a little more nuanced, but there's still a procedure given and step by step, and it's a little more involved. But yeah, that's the main contribution of the paper. So we can kind of go through the steps. But proposition 3 is the equivalence proposition for the translation between the account based and the UTXO base and the account base, and it's another constraint on both ledgers such that the balances reflect each other and satisfy an inequality. So part of this system is kind of, let's see. Oh, I give proof.
What's that?
I give a proof.
Oh, proof. Note that for every iteration of the while loop, one address is removed, and sometimes remain receive. Both SS and RS have an address removed. Therefore, if they're not the same length, then will be at least max in M and at least most M plus N iterations. Since all steps in each iteration can be done in constant time, with respect to N and M, the running time is O in M, and in what does this part mean? What is the I don't know what this. I know what big O notation is. I don't know what big omega notation is though.
Lower bound.
Oh, lower bound.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, I should have known that from the papers. As every iteration generates a transaction, the total number of generated transactions is between max in M and N plus M. Interesting. Okay. I'm gonna have to work through this example. It's probably we don't have enough time right now, but I'm gonna.
Yeah. And then finally, in section 5, where we define the hybrid ledger setup.
Sorry, section 6.
Sorry, I said 5. I meant 7.
No, 7.
Yeah. So comparison and unification.
That's the name of the paper.
The actual Chimeric ledger. In definition 14, they have a hybrid transaction format, where instead of inputs and outputs, we have maps of addresses and values.
Ooh. That's what a UTXO is.
Yeah.
You just embedded UTXOs into an account model.
It could be.
That's basically what it looks like. Okay, anyway, I'm sorry. Clearly, I didn't understand this paper the first time I read it.
And then for Chimeric ledgers, we have a set of deposit and withdrawal transactions. And I think the kind of analogy is that one is a special.
Yeah, dude. Oh, I love this. This is exactly what I want to do too. Like this exact idea. UTXO based cash-like transfers and account-based like bank account transfers. Yeah. Like using a credit card, right? Like why do we find it incumbent upon ourselves to reinvent the wheel? Because it's not right if we didn't think about it. Was it my idea? Absolutely not right. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm joking. That is not, please don't. There's going to be like a GIF of that someday.
Oh, so the related work, the definitions in section 3 are inspired by similar definitions in.
Oh, what? Okay.
19.
These are good. Let's go look at these.
20 and 21.
Explicit fees and forged values and focuses only on accounting. Okay, well, I don't want explicit fees or forged values, but I got to see why that. Maybe our system won't work with his, given that where we put some of the data. I'm really hoping it will, though.
I see.
The definition in section 4 going to be a simplification generalization, again focusing on accounting of similar definitions in 10 and 16. Those are two more good ones. The work in 22 presents a formal graph-based. Oh, I like that. Even better. Man, why didn't I read this? Hybrid transactions combine the best of both. They have the autonomy and algebraic elegance of UTXO and the simplicity and locality of account-based transactions. With a chimeric ledger, the dilemma of choosing is no more. Except there's probably a whole nother range of problems that come up.
Yep.
Please, please admit there's got to be a whole nother range of problems that comes up. Instead, both are offered and users may choose whatever they prefer. If there is any difference between the two styles, the free market would naturally price each transaction style differently. The new deposit withdrawal may be helpful to describe the transfer of assets between a main chain and a side chain, something that I would like to think about. Therefore, they could prove useful in scenarios where account-based smart contracts needed to be executed on a mostly UTXO-based ledger. A contract could receive funds through deposit and blah, blah, blah. Probably what a lot of people have been doing in terms of like Avalanche. Minimalist, abstract, and general models presented in section 3 and 4 can be and have already been used for test room development of software. Planned work, blah, blah, blah. The authors are grateful. Alex, Duncan, I've not heard this person. Philip Gant and Philip Wadler. I don't know who that person is either. Have we seen Edsco DeVries? I don't think we've seen that name before. Yes, dude. I'm excited to look at some of these works though and see get caught up on like references. I really like this description. Yeah, I feel like it's nice to have a grammar to think through these things and like start actually mapping them out a bit. Can you stop sharing this screen?
Cool.
Thanks, sir. All right. I know we're like right at time, so I hope you won't mind us. We maybe have time for one quick question if anyone wants to throw one in the chat. All right. Well, then I think with that, we are going to wrap it up and call it a day. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in with us and listening to us go over and learn a little bit about chimeric ledgers and like different grammars for talking about UTXO and account-based models. Thank you, Aaron, for leading the discussion.
Thanks for reviewing it with me. It was great.
Yeah, I hope we get to do it again, man. I hope we can figure out the iPad thing. So maybe the Zoom was a little clunky. I hope it was.
We had to Zoom into StreamYard for that.
Yeah. But yeah. Hope everyone has a good evening, good afternoon, and we will be back next week. And if you want to find out more information, then please feel free to visit us on Discord, Twitter, LinkedIn. We obviously are streaming on Twitch. All of our code is available on GitHub. We have lots of videos on YouTube of this nature, educational, tacticos, great things we've been doing recently. And for a more, like if you want to visit and see all these links, you can go to this Linktree link up in the upper top. And yeah, that'll be pretty much the end of it for us. And thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.